I love telling people short stories. I love telling them about my accomplishments. I love telling them about my failures, as long as I'm ready to laugh at myself. I also love telling people about all the dumb things I used to do as a kid because I honestly have no idea how I'm still alive. And I know you watching at home feel the same way. You love to tell stories, but you also love to hear stories. This is why we get so invested in the TV shows and characters, because we get so upset when they are written out of the show or they're killed off. And so this episode is about short stories that Jesus told to help us understand who God is. So welcome everyone to Hope Church. My name is James Furlong and I am Hope's digital media director. Here in just a minute, you're going to see a pre-recorded message from our series, Short Stories. But before I take you over there, I wanted to tell you about why I love this online experience. I saw during the pandemic how important online church is for everyone, and not just because we were all stuck at home, but because after we came out of the pandemic and we were trying to get back to our normal lives, I feel like me personally noticed that there are so many people in the world that don't meet the church's schedule. Maybe you're watching this on a Monday night or a Thursday night because that's the time in your schedule that you have available to be a part of a church experience. So we wanted to let everyone know, no matter who you are, where you're at in your walk, you are welcomed here. But more importantly, we want to let you know that we are creating an experience that is so engaging for all of you that you feel like you are right here in the building with us. But that requires just a little bit of work on your part. So if you enjoyed your time here with us today, down in the description is a link to our connection card. Fill that out. That way we can get to know who you are. And we'd also love to just tell you a little bit more about what makes Hope Hope. We also want to say thank you for spending time with us today. This is about a 40-minute video, so we appreciate you taking that time to be here. So we'd love to send you a free gift. The last thing for me is that if you are going through something, we want to let you know that you are not alone. We have a prayer and care team that is ready to serve you. So down in the description, there's also a link to our prayer request form. By filling that out, it'll go directly to the head of that prayer and care team, and they would love to be praying for you and walking through this storm with you. So, thank you again for joining us, and as promised, here is another episode of Short Stories.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Michael. I'm the youth pastor here. So glad to be able to be with you this morning. My wife and I recently got a Subaru Outback, which appears to be the new minivan in life, in preparation for our first daughter, who's going to be born in a few weeks, which is really exciting and awesome as we approach. Thanks. I'm just softening you up for whatever I'm about to say next in this sermon, so. No, it's really exciting to be stepping into that life, to be stepping into fatherhood, and, Subaru Outback is very nice and safe. They're not sponsoring this, by whatever that means. But my first car, as I think about it, we were, going through stuff, I'm cleaning it out, and I'm thinking back to my very first car, which was a really fun little '04 bright red Dodge Neon that had a front side driver's door that would get stuck at the worst times throughout the winter. It was great. But it was my first car. I got it when I was 18, and I remember that car had two rules. There wasn't a whole lot, but there was two rules that came with that car. And the first was that as I was driving around, I was 18 at the time, so I was told, you don't necessarily have a curfew. You can go do things and hang out with friends. But the car needs to be back in the garage by midnight, so just make sure that happens. And so, of course, that means I had to be home by midnight, because that's how that goes. But the second rule, so we had the curfew, but then there was also the chauffeur rule. So I have a sister who's a year younger than me. She lives out in near Philly right now. But the chauffeur rule also kicked in, that as I now had this car, with first car also comes lots of responsibility. And so I had to carry my sister around to the places that she also needed to go, which really mainly just meant taking her to and from school, among other things. And it was an interesting time in life. This sermon isn't really about cars. It's about my sister. Because I tell you, 18-year-old Michael was not very happy with the way that his sister went about organizing her life and getting ready in the mornings as we were trying to go to school. I had graduated here at OHS, and they started in the mornings at 7:20, and sometimes that wouldn't even be when we were heading out the door. Like, we would be heading out at like 7:25, and I just could not understand. If you're out there watching somewhere, dear sister of mine, explain to me what was going on that made you take so long to get ready in the morning. I didn't get it. It caused a lot of tension between us, to be honest, because all I saw was that she was just being really, really slow, and maybe doing so on purpose because she was just I don't know what was going on. It was rough, and I held it against her for quite a while. And now we're good. I love her a lot, and we've talked through it. And even as I was talking to her after preaching on Thursday about it, like, she told me, there's, of course, stuff that was going on in her own life that I had no idea about, that made it hard to get ready and hard to go about doing these sorts of things. And we've talked through that. And of course, now I would have all the grace in the world. But at the time, I was not ready to forgive. I had a lot of tardy slips that year, and I was not ready to forgive. And we all have these kinds of things, right? We all have these sorts of things that can just kind of get under our skin in our childhood and going to school as kids. It's full of those kind of grudges, those kinds of little things that just creep in, and you're just not ready to let go of them yet. And I mean, clearly even now I've still got some stuff to work through in terms of all of that, but it's all about learning how to deal with people and how to forgive, and we all have those kinds of fun little stories. But a lot of us also, probably all of us, we've all had some real brokenness that's happened, some real sin that has been committed against us. We've all had people who have hurt us, who've lied about us, who have stabbed us in the back, who have stepped on us trying to get somewhere else, who have done real things against us, that have made broken choices, and we've experienced the result of those broken choices. It's a lot worse than just making somebody late for school. Maybe you're here today because you've experienced a lot of hurt in previous churches, and if churches are full of people, then my gut would say that your hurt comes from interactions with people that you had that were broken and that were just shattered. We've all suffered at the hands of other people's broken choices. And I'm sure as we think about those moments, we can also think that somewhere in the middle of all of that, of all the brokenness and trying to figure out how to deal with the hurt and the pain, that in the middle of the mess, somebody has told us that our job in that, like, we need to forgive people. But it's really hard to forgive people because forgiveness is something that's really messy, and as we've gotten a lot of conflicting things about what forgiveness actually is and what it means. Right, we've all heard that phrase, you just need to forgive and forget. But for some of us, it's really hard to forget. And so we don't really know how to forgive. We've heard people tell us that, it's so important to just go to somebody, forgive them, try to work things out, smooth things over. And so we try to do that, but it comes even at cost to ourselves. Some of us might have grown up, or we carry this weight with us, thinking that forgiveness is about allowing truly toxic and bad people to stay as a part of our lives, or maybe that we have to be reconciled to somebody else in order to truly experience forgiveness. And all of this just makes forgiveness that much harder, that much more convoluted. Or maybe we kind of like to hold on to grudges. Maybe we're people who are constantly demanding patience for ourselves, but punishment for other people, or we really don't like the idea that, forgiveness might mean forgiving somebody who doesn't even think that they've done anything wrong. We don't want to step into that. They don't deserve that forgiveness until they come and tell me that they're sorry. Forgiveness is hard. Forgiveness is really messy. It's so much easier to just cancel people, to chase things down, to get our own way, to demand our own repayment than it is to try the difficult work of seeing people and seeing their value as actual human beings with their own stories and with their own things that they're going through, like God might want. And because we're talking about humans, of course that means that forgiveness is messy, right? Because we are. Humans are messy. And yet it seems to be something that is really cared about. All the major religions in the world have something to say about forgiveness and how we interact with each other when we've wronged each other. It seems to be something that God cares deeply about. It's something that's really at the heart of what Christianity as a religion is all about. And as this morning we're going to be talking about Jesus, and as he was here on this earth, he was claiming to be the Son of God. And so, of course, lots of people were asking him, okay, well, how do we do this then? Man, how do we forgive one another? How do we enter into a relationship with each other? If you're God, help us out here. Like, what are we supposed to do about any of this? And so because he was asked so much on how to deal with other people, there was one instance, there was actually a lot of them, but there's one instance we're going to look at this morning where Jesus told a nice short story that should give us a lot to consider as we work through forgiveness in our own lives. And so today, we're going to be looking at what Matthew, who was one of his followers, we're going to be looking at what he said about a different interaction that Jesus had with another disciple named Peter. So even these people who were following after Jesus, they had a lot of questions about forgiveness. And so Matthew wrote down for us this kind of interaction between what Jesus said and what Peter said. And it's found in Matthew 18. But before we jump in, I just want to give you guys a little bit of context this morning. And so right before the story that we're about to read, Jesus has been doing a lot of teaching on a lot of different things, but he's been doing this teaching in the context of like stuff that was going on within the church, within people who were following Jesus. It was kind of addressed to that segment of the population. And so if you're here this morning, if you're watching with us, and that's where you're at, you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, you're a Christian, that's what you're moving towards, then I would advise you to listen up, because Jesus says, hey, this is for you guys. This is something that God cares so much about what it looks like to lead lives of forgiveness, that there is a lot at stake when we as followers of Jesus do not forgive. And so I'd advise you, listen up a little bit. That's what Jesus is saying here. For those of you who maybe aren't there yet, if you don't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, that's not where you're at, then honestly this morning you're kind of off the hook, which is nice. This is optional for you. Like if you want to keep living your life and hold grudges or seek your own justice or just try to muscle through what it looks like to forgive all on your own, you can. Like nobody's stopping you. That's great. Do what you got to do. But I'd ask that you just consider what we're about to talk about this morning, because no matter where we're at, unforgiveness takes its toll on us. Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, it's a weight that drags us down, and nobody likes carrying around the weight of unforgiveness. And so, wherever it is that you're at, let's just see what Jesus has to say and what that could do in our lives as it changes the way we approach forgiveness and the way we approach others. And so let's jump into this story here. This is in Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 21. So Matthew's writing about Peter here. So Peter came to Jesus and he asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. So before we go anywhere, today we're going to try to unpack and understand just what kind of forgiveness we're dealing with. I remember taking a psych class in college, and my professor always said, before you jump into any sort of argument, any sort of debate, first thing you need to do is define your terms, because you could be saying the same words but talking about very, very different things, and we don't want to do that here. And so we're going to see what kind of forgiveness is it that they are talking about. And so I got to nerd out a little bit and do some word study because I like that sort of thing. And the word forgiveness, the word forgive that they're talking about here, is a Greek word that's pronounced aphiamai. Everybody say aphiamai. Very nicely done. My Greek professor would be proud. If you're in the chat, you can just type it in, try to spell it right. I don't know. I'm sure you said it at home. That's great. This is aphiamai. It's a word that means to let go. And specifically, it's kind of used in this context of like you're letting go of a debt by not demanding that it be paid. The debt is still there. It should probably still be paid, but you're letting go of it just by not demanding that it be paid back to you. And it's the opposite of a different word used. It's called krateo. And that means that you try to get somebody to bend to your will or to your power. And so it's kind of the opposite. And that word also gets used in this passage. And so on the one hand, there's this idea of kind of canceling the debt, letting it go while letting that person stand on their own before God. Or there's canceling a person by making them bend to you and answer to you for the things that they've done. And so what Peter is asking here is simply like, hey man, how many times do I cancel somebody's debt before I can go and get what's owed to me? Do I have to do it 7 times? Like, is 8 like my number where I can just go and get what I want out of this and try to bend them to my will? And Jesus says, no. The bar's really, really high for this. And to illustrate the point even more, he then goes and tells us a story with something that we can all understand, money. So let's read this short story together. Jesus said, after telling him, no, it's not just 7 times, it's 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and all his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. So we've got this guy that owes this king 10,000 bags of gold. 10,000 bags of gold is a ridiculous amount of money. It's not even like a feasible amount for most of us. It's in the billions. It's estimated that in today's dollars is worth about $3.48 billion. I don't even know how you accrue just that much debt. To kind of break it down even further, if you worked at just normal minimum wage, it would take 200,000 years to make that kind of money, which, of course, that's just not even possible. That's an amount that realistically is never going to be able to be paid back, never going to be able to be, that was what was pardoned for this guy. That was what was let go. And now, like, most of us are never going to know that kind of money, right? Most of us are never going to just have 3.48 with all of those zeros sitting in our bank account. That's just not something we see a whole lot. But a lot of us do know what it feels like to have insurmountable debt. We've all had moments where we have hospital bills where those letters just keep coming and keep coming and keep coming in the mail, and it seems like they don't stop. We've had car trouble that just continuously keeps us from being able to do different and better future-oriented things with our money because we keep having to put it into this and into that. We have credit card debt or school loans that they just feel like they're holding us back from being able to live a normal life because it's this weight that's always looming over us. Now imagine, this will take a little stretch of imagination, but imagine if the IRS called you up and they said, you know what? You don't have to pay back any of that. It's gone. It's fine. We'll let it go. Imagine if that college that you owe tuition to or the hospital just called up and was like, hey, you know what? We've actually just settled everything. That debt that you've been worried about for the past months or weeks or years, like we've let it go. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And I'm sure first of us would be like, is this like a scam? Is this a scam call? Like, no, really. It's gone. It's taken care of. It's over. How would you feel? How would you feel if that debt, whatever that thing is, that debt was just released, let go, not demanded back? We'd probably feel relief, probably a lot of disbelief. But eventually there would be gratitude, right? There would be a peace that settles over as now you can start to think ahead to the things that you want to do. There would be joy. There would be happiness. You would smile a lot. You'd laugh a lot. People might think that you're maybe just a little bit crazy because it's something you probably couldn't stop talking about for a while. Those little things that used to bother you a lot wouldn't bother you nearly as much now because this debt that has been sitting on your shoulders is now gone. That would be amazing for a lot of us to just have that debt wiped out. This man in this story has been forgiven a debt of $3.48 billion. And so if we think we would be joyful, we'll see how he responds. The story continues like this. But when that servant, the servant who was just forgiven billions and billions of dollars worth of debt, when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and he begged him, "Be patient with me and I will pay it back," the very same words that he said just a little bit ago, but he refused. Instead, he went off and he had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. Now, that's not quite the response that we would think would come when you're forgiven $3.48 billion. He turns to his fellow man who owes him still a substantial amount. It's estimated to be around $6,000 worth of debt. But in light of what's been done for him, you'd think that he'd be able to extend that forgiveness on, right? That he'd be able to cancel that debt, to be able to let that go, to not demand payment. You'd think there'd be joy. You'd think there'd be excitement at a chance to do for somebody else what was just done for him, but instead, he assaults this guy and he throws him in prison until he can pay his debt. There's something wrong here. There's something wrong. There's something deeper about this unforgiveness that he has inside of him that he's not able to extend this on to somebody else. And that's the thing, is that we get hurt on every level when we hang on to unforgiveness, when we allow wrongs to kind of fester within us and go unaddressed and eat away at us. Like, he should be able to extend this thing that he's gotten to others, but there's something going on inside where he's not able to let things go, where he's not able to extend this forgiveness on. And that's why this is something that God cares so deeply about. Because he knows what unforgiveness can do when it's left to sit inside of a person. He knows how it can just spread and fester and rot somebody from the inside out. Because then it starts to affect more than what's going on internally. It starts to spread out to others, and we actually get to see that here in the next verses. Because the other servants saw what had happened. They saw him throw this guy in jail and beat him up and demand his own payment. And when the other servants saw this, they were outraged. And they went and told their master everything that happened. Then the master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said, "I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" That's what we're talking about. You'd think that he would be able to extend this on, and the fellow servants saw this, and they even recognized that there is something fundamentally, deeply wrong here. When you're not able to extend the grace that you receive, when you're not able to extend and give the forgiveness you receive to others, but instead you withhold. There is something wrong there. And it's kind of an aside, again, this is being taught to people who are following Jesus, who are within that body of Christ. And so, honestly, I think it's a big turnoff for people who are not in that, who are not Christians, when they see people who claim to have this love and forgiveness and grace and mercy that's just been given to them, overflowing, and then they don't extend it to others. Where instead they extend judgment, or they withhold forgiveness, or they extend more rules, or they extend higher impossible standards, and everybody around seems to be okay with that. That's not cool. And if you're here because you've experienced that kind of vindictive sort of judgment from people who claimed to have so much love, like, if you've experienced that, I'm sorry. Because that's not what God is about, and that's not what forgiveness is about. And if you're here and you are a follower of Jesus, then the question for us is like, who are we to get to determine to withhold what God is willing to give freely to everybody? What gives us that right to determine like who gets to experience forgiveness or not? I mean, we like it for ourselves, right? Like we like the idea that Jesus loves us enough to forgive us, but who are we then to say that others don't meet our standards? It's not our standards they have to meet. And so here's the problem that we all deal with, and Jesus says it's especially a problem for those of us who do follow God. The problem is this, is that we demand punishment for others, and yet we want patience for ourselves. If you're following along, this is one of our two fill in the blanks. We want punishment for other people, but we want patience for ourselves. We want that grace and that love of Jesus to cover all of my own flaws and my own faults and my own sins. And yet we turn around and judge others, or we turn around and crucify others, or we turn around and demand more from others who are in need of just that very same forgiveness. And that's not right. There's something wrong here. There's something wrong if we can't extend the forgiveness that we ourselves receive. We have to be able to cancel the debt, to let go, to not demand repayment, and not cancel the person. Because God says, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that He's the one that everybody's going to have to answer to. He will deal with each individual person accordingly, and we all don't answer to each other, but we answer to Him for what it is that we've done. You're not Batman. You don't get to go out and seek your own vengeance and justice all on your own. You're a fellow human being who's in need of the exact same grace and mercy and forgiveness as others. And so with all that in mind, let's see just how this king handles the servant who has demanded punishment from others but patience for himself. It says that in anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. And then Jesus says, "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." Jesus says, this is how God deals with us unless we are willing to forgive. Forgiveness matters so much to God that we see that our forgiveness is contingent on how we forgive. If we're willing to let that forgiveness and grace and mercy continue to flow through us to other people, that's awesome, that's great, that's how we were designed, that's how God wanted things to be. But if we don't forgive, if we're willing to cancel others, if we make it our mission to get revenge and to bend other people to our will, to pay back what we think they owe us, and that's the measure that we get back. We get our own standard of forgiveness back to us, which isn't forgiveness at all. Forgiveness is that decision to cancel somebody else's debt to you. We cancel debt. We don't cancel people. So, if you're following along, last one that we've got for today, we cancel debt. We cancel the wrongs that people have done to us, but we don't cancel people. It's not our job. Yes, they wronged you, and for some of you, they really wronged you in ways that have hurt and have had lasting impact. That's true. Nobody's saying that that is not true. But you're not going to let that wrong rule over you. You aren't going to demand your own payment from them. You're going to ask God to deal with them because that's what His job is, and you're also going to ask Him to help you to be able to move forward and to heal. Forgiveness also doesn't equal just a complete reconciliation either. And of course, that's nice to be able to go to somebody who wronged you and work things out and to make a new path moving forward, and there's good things that can happen there, but that's not always possible, right? In some cases, it's unwise or unsafe to be able to even begin to approach those conversations. And so while reconciliation and being able to mend relationships is awesome, sometimes that doesn't happen. But that's not what forgiveness is about. Forgiveness is that decision to cancel somebody else's debt to you, to say that even though they owe this to me, it's not my job to make them pay. Forgiveness is the process of making that active choice to cancel somebody's debt and not the person. And along with that, a lot of us probably will feel like, hey, but even if I'm trying to say that I forgive you, I don't always feel like I've forgiven, because a lot of times we use our feelings as that test for whether things are actually going well or not. And yeah, you're probably not going to feel like you've forgiven, at least not for a while. It's a decision. It's not about the emotion. That's not what's asked of us to feel like we've reached this level of forgiveness. It's about that decision. It's about not allowing the emotions of their actions to be in control of your reactions and your attitude. When we forgive, it is a decision again and again and again that we are not going to hold somebody's debt against them. We cancel debt. We don't cancel people because we're all people in need of God's forgiveness. And because this is something that Jesus modeled for us. God who made us and who created us, and we believe he wants us to be a part of this world and to love one another and to share in creating beauty in this world. That's who modeled this for us. Because what we as humans bring to the table is just every broken choice, every selfish action, everything that elevates me over at the expense of others. It all demands a payment. Not to each other. We owe God a debt for everything we do that contributes to the brokenness of this world. And that payment, some of that debt, the only thing that really pays it is unfortunately death and separation from God. When we choose to follow ourselves over God, we get that, ourselves over God forever. And that's part of this, right? Like if you're here and you don't, or if you've ever been in your point, and I've been at this point in my life where like I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. But then I didn't really recognize that I owed anybody anything, and I just kept canceling people and demanding payment for what they owed me. You keep carrying around that weight of unforgiveness and everything that comes with it if you don't recognize that you yourself have also done some things that other people say maybe you need to say sorry for. But if there's any part of you that knows that like, yeah, I've done some things wrong, that I recognize I've hurt others, I've contributed to this world's broken choices, like God could demand that payment from you. And instead of just kind of happily carrying out his judgment, being the only one who could actually like demand repayment from us, God actually made a way for us to restore our relationship with him. And he did it through Jesus. We just saw here Jesus, the Son of God, who took our place and took our punishment and let God pour that all out on him. And all we have to do to be forgiven is to follow the one who took our place. That's it. When we surrender to Jesus, God cancels our debt, but not us. We have a way to be able to be with God again. That's all it is. It's as simple as that. Because to God, forgiveness is something that any one of us could have. He made it available to anyone and also to everyone. He did that. There's no discrimination for who can and cannot have the forgiveness of God. Anybody who calls on the name of the Lord can be saved. And so that means that the person who sinned against you cannot be denied an opportunity to have the forgiveness of God simply because they sinned against you. I'm going to say that again. The person who sinned against you is not denied the ability to seek out God's own forgiveness just because it was you that they sinned against. Because we all have sinned against God, and the same God who's at work in you to help you heal from the hurt that they did against you, he's the same God who's at work in them, drawing them close so that they can also experience his life-changing and life-altering love. So we don't get to decide who gets forgiveness or who doesn't get forgiveness if we're following Jesus. Jesus is the one who forgives. He is the one who saves. God is the one who judges. We're here to continually just let that flow through us. Now, I've forgiven my sister. It was so silly, and of course, I love her very, very much. I was very mad at her at the time for making me late every single morning, but I wasn't really mad at her. As we've kind of talked through and I've reflected through on some different things that were going on, like we were both in a situation where neither of us were set up to succeed. My senior year, my mom really wasn't around all that much, and so a lot of times it was just like me and my sister in the house, and we were on our own a lot. And I honestly didn't even recognize what was happening to us because we were just trying to survive, right? And so when I look back, I think the one that I was really mad at, it wasn't my sister, it wasn't my mom even for not really being there. Like the one I was really harboring a lot of anger and bitterness and unforgiveness towards was my dad. In my mind, he was the one that caused our family to split. He was the one that caused my mom to spiral into depression. He was the one that caused the living situation that my sister and I were in, and where we were just broken and fighting with one another and weren't able to help each other succeed. And I carried a lot of weight. I still carry a lot of weight and emotions surrounding him and what he did to our family. It's a lot. And so as a part of working through that, I'm in therapy right now, which has been really awesome. I found a really good person who's been able to help me sort of talk through and process through and work through all of the stuff that's been going on. And a bulk of the work that I'm doing in therapy is realizing that like all that hurt and pain that I carry around has been affecting all the things in my life. Just like we've seen, when we carry those burdens, they seep in deep, and that unforgiveness just kind of spreads, and it starts to spread out to the things going on around me. And so if you're here and you're struggling with some of those things, if you're struggling with unforgiveness, then maybe you notice that it kind of comes out in these other different ways as well. Maybe you just struggle with a lot of anger. You're not totally sure why. Maybe you just have a lot of anxiety or worry or fear, or maybe you're just struggling with a lot of depression. And like I know, because I've worked through all those different things as outpourings of unforgiveness. And the more that I've learned how to forgive, how to cancel that debt, but not the person, the more that I can learn not to hold on to power, not to look for my own version of justice, not to look for ways to punish somebody who honestly isn't even around anymore. The more that I cancel that debt, but not the person that my dad is, the better person I become. Because when I'm less operating out of bitterness and anger that I carry around, like that makes me a better husband. When I'm not closed off and trying to be self-protective because I'm afraid, it helps me to be a more open communicator, even sharing stories like this today. I'm going to be able to be a better father to my own daughter as she grows up because I'm not weighed down by the unforgiveness that I carry of my own father. I get to leave his life in the hands of my heavenly Father, and that's okay. But it's a process. This wasn't just like a one-time epiphany that I had where I was able to turn all of it on and I realized what was going on and yay, like I've forgiven my dad. Like, no. It's a process. It takes time. And it can be really, really hard to tell if you've actually started down that path of starting to forgive, of really being able to let go of debt, but not people. But one way that's been helpful for me, and it's one way we're going to try today, one way that's you can start to begin that process is by praying for that person. You can pray that you could genuinely desire God's goodness and mercy to be present in their life as well as yours. That the goodness that He shows you in your own life would start to show up in theirs as well. You can pray that God would help you to see them just like He does. As somebody who's broken and who's in need of forgiveness just like you were, just like you are. You can pray that God would help you to let go of whatever it is that they did that wouldn't have to define your life anymore, that He could take that weight off of your shoulders, and you can pray that God would deal with them as only He can. But to pray for somebody who has wronged you, who has deeply hurt you, it does not feel good. It takes work. It takes time. But imagine being able to feel freer when people hurt you. Imagine being able to not necessarily carry on the weight of all the things that other people have done to you, and even being able to say as people are kind of trying to bring you down that like, hey, like I'm praying for some good things for you today. Can you imagine the look on their face if they were trying to insult you or come against you and they're like, well, I hope God blesses you today, like, and really mean it. It takes people back. Imagine being able to walk around like that, to be free, the joy you could have in your life if the pains that you experience, you can, instead of just carrying them inside, just lay them down at the feet of Jesus. I hope my dad comes to know God. I genuinely do. If there ever came a day where I got word that like his life had turned around and that things had changed and that he was in full surrender to the God of the universe, like that would be incredible. I don't know if I'll see it. Sometimes it's really hard for me to believe that he can, but I'm working through that, and I can genuinely say that I desperately want the goodness of God to be present in the life of my father, who hurt me, who broke our family. I want good, godly things to be happening in his life. I want him to know Jesus. A year ago, I don't know if I could have stood up here and told you that with full belief in what I was actually saying, but I do. And there's going to be times in the future where probably I don't believe it again. When my daughter ends up being the same age that I was as I was going through all of that neglect and stuff, I'm going to have to start this process all over again as I see just how young I was at that time, and I get hit with those waves all over again. Forgiveness is a process of canceling debt. It's a decision to cancel debt, but not people. But there's freedom in that forgiveness. When we know that God who forgives in abundance, and I know that God has forgiven me in abundance, and so who am I to hold that back from other people? I want them to experience that love and that grace and that mercy and that forgiveness just like I have, and so I'm not going to hold that back from them. My job is to cancel debt, not people. And right now, that's something that we're all going to start to do. We're going to start that process right here today, together, whether you're here, whether you're online. We're going to start that together. And so I want you all to take that little card that was on your seat, grab that, grab a pen. If you're watching online, they have some instructions for you on how you can participate as well. But we're going to create a little bit of space for us to be able to start this process. And so our band's going to come out, and they're going to play through a song, and during that song, there's two things that I want you all to do. The first one might be, they're probably equally pretty hard. First thing I want you to do is to think of somebody who has wronged you. In a real way, not in a making you late for school every day way, but like in real, genuine hurt that you carry with you that you don't really know how to deal with, maybe things you've just been pushing aside because you don't want to deal with it. Think somebody has wronged you. And don't be afraid of the feelings that come up as you do. Don't be afraid of those, but just be willing to sit with them for a moment, to name them objectively, like, hey, when I think of this person, this is what I feel, God. This is what I want to happen to them right now. Honestly, God, this is kind of where I'm at with this person and what it is that they did to me. And then at any point when you're ready, during this song, you can write their name in the gaps that you see on that little card. Because, second thing you can do, whenever you're ready, is to pray the prayer that's on that card. And if you're not a Christian or like you're not too comfortable with prayer, just like I encourage you to try it anyways. Just think of what could be true if these words really became true in your life. So I'm going to read this for us just so you can see what it says. And then again, at any point, I want you to try to do this. So the prayer says, God, thank you for canceling my debt that I could not pay back on my own. Help me to see whoever it is like you see me. Help me to see my dad like you see me as your child that you love. Help me to heal from feeling guilt and shame and anger and from wanting revenge. And I pray, whoever it is, I pray that my dad would begin to experience the love and joy and peace and freedom that comes from your forgiveness. Amen.
What an incredible episode. Thank you again for joining us. And listen, if you are ever interested in joining us for a live service, we have a couple of options for you. If you live in the Lake Country area, be sure to check out our website. Yes, it is also down in the description below. That way you can see when our in-person service times are. Plus, if you have kids, be sure to check out the Hope's Kids page. That way you can see what your kids might experience on a Sunday morning. If you live outside the Lake Country area, but you're still interested in joining us for a live service, be sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you get that notification bell when we go live every Sunday morning at 8:30 Central. And just know that we have an active chat filled with chat hosts and other people part of our online community that are excited to meet you. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.